I'm not sure. Some of our people might still need to chat because she called in on the phone, Erin, and that's who we could hear.
Yep.
So,
okay.
Well, can you hear me? I'm Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. Yes. We can hear you.
Great. You can't see me though, can you?
Nope.
Now we're watching.
Perfect, because I'm eating a donut and I don't want you to see it.
I hope it's a good one, Jamie, with lots of stuff in the middle.
That's for tomorrow.
So, Erin, if you want to go ahead and call the meeting to order and do introductions, then we can move into executive session.
Okay. I call the meeting to order at 1:05 p.m. If we can start with the people in the room with introductions, and then we'll go to those of us online.
Bruce Newell.
Tracy Cook. Superintendent Arnson.
Melissa Williams.
Evan Hammer. Jeff Dowd.
Marla Stark.
Jenny Stapp.
Carol Urban.
Jessica Edwards.
And then online.
Okay. Erin LaFramboise.
This is Kenning Arlich.
I heard Jamie as well.
Yes, Jamie.
This is Ann Kish.
Ooh, great. And we all feel very sorry for Ken Wall, who's in Australia right now.
Sleeping.
Hope he gets sunburned.
Okay, well, we're going to pause the recording, correct, and then go into executive action.
Yes, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows that you should log into the other GoToMeeting login that I sent to you, where we'll conduct the executive session and ensure that we can do so in private. Is everybody clear on that?
So do we log out of this session?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you have another workstation you can use to log into your other meeting.
No.
Okay.
So should we retire?
We're gonna.
Seated. Let me know so we can call back to session.
Let's see. Did we have Anne? I think I saw
She was on earlier, and I didn't.
I'm on.
Hi. Okay. I think we do have everybody.
Okay, we'll call our session, our commission meeting back to order at 1:26. Thank you guys for pausing to let us go into executive session. And we'll go to the first item, which is the approval of the minutes of December 5th, 2018. Can I get someone to approve those minutes?
I move to be approved. I'm sorry. I move to be approved as presented.
Need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion is passed. Thank you. And then you'll see that there's the final of the October 9th minutes. And we'll move forward with the legislative update.
Great. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold and I have a cough drop, so I apologize. I sent out a document via email just a little while ago, and we'll get that posted with your regular commission meeting materials, so it's part of the public record. But a lot has been happening very quickly here, and so I wanted to make sure you had the most up-to-date information available. Where we sit with our budget, we had, I think, a really, really good budget hearing last Tuesday. I think we had people there who could really speak effectively about how they rely on the data and information from the state library. Connie Behe was there to talk about what the Imagine If libraries in Kalispell do to support workforce development in the Flathead Valley. We had good support from the Montana Library Association, and the leadership team here at the state library really worked hard to hone my testimony so that we were speaking very specifically to the impact of the budget cuts and the work that's not being done because of the effect of the cuts and the loss of the staff. I'm really pleased to say that following the hearing, we've had some great follow-up discussions with members of the subcommittee on both sides of the aisle. They're all expressing sincere support for the state library, concern about our budgets, a desire for the state library to have stable, ongoing funding that's not subject to the kinds of cyclical budget cycles that we have seen. So the budget subcommittee has taken a couple of actions now to date. First, yesterday, the subcommittee voted to move through the House Appropriations a companion bill to House Bill 2 that would create a digital library services state special revenue account. And the intent behind that account is that they identify various revenue streams that could flow into that account to fund library services. We've talked at a very high level about what some of those revenue streams might be. For those of you who are at the budget hearing, you might have heard Representative Jones speak a little bit about a direct fee-for-service model, a kind of paywall in front of the cadastral application, for example. I want to make it clear that he has essentially talked himself out of that model. I'm not hearing any discussion about a fee-for-service model at this point, and we'll continue to provide suggestions for other solutions rather than a fee-for-service model. Much of the ideas that we're talking about were generated through our work sessions that we had in commission meetings over the past year or so, where we talked about different kinds of funding sources, like looking at state business processes that have funding streams and cost recovery models built in that could provide some funding for the data. For example, the MIPA filing fees that occur. There's a proposed aquatic invasive species funding, and we know that the web application that they are using for that program relies on about 8 different data layers that we provide. They're looking at funding that's in the state's House Bill 10, which is the major IT bill for new application and web or IT infrastructure development. We've been able to demonstrate that some of the applications in that bill rely on our data and so forth. Some other ideas that are being discussed. It's a little too early to say what exactly those revenue sources might look like. Where we see this bill going, sort of the next steps, it will be proposed in House Appropes this afternoon, and then it will be assigned to a legislative bill drafter for drafting. And then we'll begin working with that drafter and other stakeholders to put forward a bill. It will go through the same legislative process as other bills. Ideally, the legislature might identify some revenue sources this session to begin to provide revenue in that account immediately. But the bill also proposes an interim study where it would be the work of an interim committee. They mentioned yesterday, Legislative Finance Committee, to identify additional revenue sources. Again, with the idea that we have essentially a diverse portfolio of revenue sources that all flow into this account that we could then use to fund our services and operations. I'll pause and ask if there are any questions.
I'm curious about the proposed title for this bill named the Digital Library Services Special Revenue Account. What does the word digital do to? meaning of that?
Evan's looking like he wants to.
Well, I know that in general, listening to the subcommittee, listening to other agencies that have gone up, they're keying in on agency missions changing, the nature of the work that they do changing as more things become digital. And so I've certainly heard that in our hearing as well as in the Historical Society hearing. So I suspect that's what drove that decision on the name. But
I think you're exactly right. I think Representative Jones is keen in on the idea that the State Library is modernizing, that these agencies are relying on digital data. And this is an attempt to reflect that nature of our mission. I haven't seen anything in the bill that, and again, the bill just needs to be drafted, but I haven't heard any discussion that would tie our hands in how we spend those monies internally.
I would hope not. I mean, it's kind of digital to me. Sort of suggests a suite of tools. I mean, the real business is the business of the library. We happen to use digital data and digital tools, but it's kind of like I would hate for that to be in the future. To limit our ability to use funds generated in that special account. I love the idea of the special account, but the word digital seems to me to be potentially limiting. It's kind of like it's just a technology. It's not, I mean, clearly that's what we're doing now, but who knows what will make sense to folks later.
I think we know that for our operations, our digital library is not just about tools. It's about people. It's about the services. It's about the coordination, all of that.
Correct.
And I sincerely believe that the subcommittee heard and understands that as well. If anything, I think it's more of a reflection of the changing mission and a value that they place on those services.
So it's not really a changing mission, though, is it?
In their mind, it is.
Oh, okay, but
yes.
Not in our minds, right?
No.
Okay.
But in their mind, they've seen the State Library progress from a library with books and physical objects to one that is evolving into a digital space. We obviously are much more attuned to that and have been seeing it for years. They see it in 2-year snapshots. And when we talk about the need for and value of these services, it's the data and the web services and the coordination behind that work.
It comes later in the agenda, but I noticed in the collection development things, the word books never appears. And I noticed the word maps only appears once in sort of a sideways reference. And if we want to draw upon the tradition of libraries and the tradition of the state library, which was one of the first things created when the state became a state, by abandoning that language, I think it may hamper our ability to make that sort of historic argument later, is because we continue to fight for funds and to be able to do things to meet our mission. Now I'm sounding like William F. Buckley, and I apologize, but I do feel strongly that there's a conservative streak in me that says that we shouldn't be afraid to say books, and we shouldn't be attracted by the glitter of things like digital and cloud and that kind of stuff, even though they're obviously critical to our mission. Is that grumpy?
Yeah, Bruce, I have a comment on that. I think when you focus on books, you forget that libraries are information driven, and I think if we're talking about information, then we're getting information in any way we can, and currently, that's through a lot of digital processes. We don't have the physical room for books. And so I do think that the State Library has been changing a bit in the way that we've been collecting materials.
So I would argue that we still have books.
So that's just my comment.
We just don't have paper books as much anymore. We don't have paper maps as much anymore.
And I guess my little piece here would just be to say, we've had many of these discussions. Looking at this big in the longer term, in the big picture, we've been trying to get the recognition for years that we were more than just books. And while this may not be perfect as far as or your comfort level with the name of this account, it does indicate finally recognition by our budget subcommittee that we are more than just books. And
Right.
so that's a win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think if we had gone in there and talked about traditional library services, we would not be sitting here with the kind of support that we're hearing today.
I think you're a value added is what I'm hearing from them as well. It is traditional, but your value is being added by these other important jobs completed here.
Right. I think the fact that we can rely on traditional library values about providing access and ensuring equitable access for all is what's, at least in part, swaying the subcommittee away from a fee-for-use model to these other kinds of models. And I think we absolutely want to lean into those kinds of values. And I don't think that we're going to be hamstrung in how we can use these monies coming out of this special revenue account. That's something that we'll be watchful for when the bill itself is being drafted.
Jenny, this is Anna, and I apologize that I haven't read the latest email this morning. Who on the budget subcommittee intends to carry the bill?
It will be Representative Jones, at least to start. He'll be the one proposing the legislation to House Approps later today, and if we want to kind of keep moving through the agenda because I want Melissa to go listen to that hearing.
Thank you.
Yep. And then the other update is that then this morning the budget subcommittee met to take executive action for most of the agencies in their subcommittee, and they did pass motions to adopt all of the decision packages included in the executive budget, so that would allow us to restore some of the personal services funding to our budget. It includes the various fixed costs and inflationary factors. It includes the increase in the coal severance tax appropriation, which was tied to House Bill 648 last session. It does also include the elimination of the one FTE that we negotiated with the governor's budget. So there's the loss of the one FTE, but the restoration of the statewide present law adjustment as proposed by the governor. Any questions about that action?
Jenny, this is Jamie. I read through that several times. So does that mean we gained some FTEs back and then they reduced that by one, or we're down one more additional FTE as we were previously?
That's a good question. So in terms of the number of FTE, we are down one.
Okay.
But with the action to restore the statewide present law, we now, as long as nothing changes later in the session, will actually have the funding to fill the vacant positions that currently exist on the books. So there's one less essentially vacant position that we would be able to fill, but we have funding to go back and fill some of those positions that are currently vacant.
Okay, thank you.
So Jamie, this is Elsie. What that means is the opportunity was taken away of one FTE, but the opportunity of funding to fill in the discretion of the commission and the state librarian is more robust than it was before.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And with various funding sources that we have the ability to create what are called modified FTE. So FTE that are funded through grants and contracts, through our Library Services Technology Act monies, through our Land Information Act monies. And so those would be in addition to the FTE that are currently in House Bill 2 and in current law. So we have a little bit of flexibility there.
Thank you.
So with the action, our budget is still about a little less than $600,000 short from where it was 2 years ago at this point. And that was a point we made abundantly clear in our budget hearing. And the other piece of this that's kind of in motion at this point is action to try to restore at least that much, and what I heard today is even a little bit more through some amendments to bills that are working their way through House appropriations. And so we'll be working with legislators on what that might look like. But both Representatives Woods and Hamlet earlier today stated on the record that that's something that they are working towards. I think there was real concern expressed in our budget hearing that the governor's budget does not make the state library whole, and a recognition and a desire to make us whole and then some. And so we'll be working in the next several days and weeks to see what we can do with those amendments to try to restore the remaining portions of the state library's budgets, which are largely operational funds. Part of the recognition, it's not just trying to completely restore the state library's budget. There's also a recognition that if this state special revenue account is successful, it may take some time to begin to generate monies. And our budget subcommittee wants to make sure that we have some funding in the meantime.
So that's a one-time only proposal?
It could be some one-time only monies, exactly. You know, I guess I would say that if the session ended today, where our budget sits is where 2 months ago I hoped we would be at the end of the session. So to date, I feel like things are progressing very positively. That doesn't mean that there can't be further action between now and the end of the session, but it would take a negative action to undo what the budget subcommittee has done. There could be across the board cuts, but I'm not hearing anything like that. And we are still hearing all of this momentum behind the idea of a special revenue account and additional amendments to bring us even more funds.
Yeah, kidding.
Any questions?
Yeah.
I did include in the memo to all of you some updates on legislation that we're following. The legislation itself, there's not a lot that impacts us. The one that I would highlight, the House Bill 150, which is the cleanup bill for the Next Generation 911 laws. Originally, it had included, or the intent was that it include the continuation of our GIS account to allow us to continue to do some GIS assessment work in the future for Next Gen 911. That account does not exist in the current form of House Bill 150. It was scaled back to simply a cleanup bill. However, there is a companion bill being drafted that should include that account and perhaps some opportunities for funding there. House Bill 150 had a hearing last week before the House Energy and Telecommunications Committee. That committee has said they will not act on House Bill 150 until they see this companion bill in order to ensure that there's good cooperation to continue that effort. Any questions or comments? Anything else you guys have been hearing about during the legislative session that you want to discuss?
I think that's all very helpful news, Jenny. And, that's largely due to your hard work. I have heard from campus leadership here in Bozeman that there's a feeling that there's a new tone in the legislature this year, a positive tone toward education in general. Mm-hmm. So that's.
Mm-hmm. Kenning, they were talking about in subcommittee yesterday a student access portal that's really designed to collect and combine and make available information for students from K-12 on through college that provides information and resources to help people identify career paths and educational opportunities to keep them on their career paths. I see real opportunity to work with the commission on making sure that library services are reflected in that access portal. And I had a brief conversation with the commissioner at the subcommittee hearing today about that. I got the impression that this is in early stages of discussion and development and growing from what they were originally envisioning, but there was some expression of interest in maybe a phase 3 or 4 development of trying to work to include libraries in that effort. So that's something that we can touch base on after the session.
That's great. I'd be
Well,
very interested in that.
are we ready to move on to the state librarian's report?
We are, but the state librarian's computer's frozen.
Okay.
So I'll do my best to ad lib until I can get it unfrozen. Well, some things I wanted to bring us all up to speed on are that last meeting we had a conversation about needing to freeze the Montana Shared Catalog applicants while we addressed a funding or a staffing shortfall, particularly as it pertains to our ability to support school libraries. And from there, we had a meeting with the Office of Public Instruction. And for those of you online, Elsie had to leave. I'm sorry she's not here for this. We've made some really exciting progress working with the Office of Public Instruction. Out of our meetings with Elsie, we are in the process of drafting a memorandum of understanding with OPI where for the next couple of years they would fund an FTE to be housed here at the state library that would be a shared catalog system administrator specifically focused on schools. We would do the hiring and provide all of the overhead and supervision and support for the position. And then the idea behind the position is that we would establish certain metrics that we would use to evaluate the impact of the position and then jointly work with OPI to seek permanent funding for the position in the next legislative session. So that memorandum of understanding is drafted. It's currently being reviewed by the Office of Public Instruction. Our hope is that we can get it signed very shortly so that we can begin the recruitment process and have a staff person hired by early spring. So we're identifying what those metrics will be and moving forward from there. Casey, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add.
Well, then once we did that, we do want to basically unfreeze, reopen the application process. It's pretty exciting.
Jamie, while you're with us, I didn't know if you wanted to share an update about the Trust for Montana Libraries or if you prefer that I do that.
I think it would be better.
So just to make you all aware, the Trust for Montana Libraries, as you know, we now have a board. That board had its first board meeting about the third week of January. Stu Wilson was out with them. He presented to the board the bylaws and articles of incorporation that our steering group had originally drafted. And the board was satisfied with the progress made there. Those documents are going through legal review now by a nonprofit attorney that Library Strategies has contracted with here in Helena. She had some additional recommendations for those 2 documents, and so the board voted electronically this week to adopt the bylaws and articles of incorporation as recommended by the attorney. So those documents are now ready to be filed with the Secretary of State's office so that our trust can become its own separate legal entity. And then from there, Library Strategies will continue drafting the 501c3 documents that need to be filed with the IRS. So they're making good progress. They had a good discussion at the board meeting about additional future board members as well as additional future funding sources to begin to fund. Right now they're focused on operational funds as the trust gets off the ground. Their next meeting is scheduled for August 9th, which is the day before the commission meeting and the start of the Montana Library Association conference. And so we'll have an update from April 9th. Yes, April 9th. So we'll have Stu here with us at your April 10th commission meeting, and he plans to be here for some of the Library Association conference as well.
I have a question about the trust. Have they begun discussing any plans for getting some sort of an online presence?
Stu has talked about both an online website, that'll have information about the board. I don't know that they're at the point now of talking about sort of a marketing slogan, branding, that kind of thing. I think that's yet to come.
It would make the narrative easier if some of these documents, even in draft form, were out there. We were exercising sort of massive transparency, right from the get-go.
Yeah.
So we could share this with the library community if they were curious.
I agree.
I mean, even if I'm not sure that it's appropriate that it be put on the state library's website. I think it's probably not.
I don't think it is.
But it seems to me that maybe this would be something that we could use some funds to get thrown up rapidly, even if it wasn't the final deal.
I can go back to Stu and ask, that is one of the things on our contract with Library Strategies, is that they provide that service for the trust. So I can go back to Stu and ask for an update on what their timeline is for getting that done.
I think when we were discussing this, a year ago, that everyone sort of acknowledged the devil was in the details. Now we're getting some details. It'd be good to take and make those visible.
Right. Good.
Jenny, thank you for giving the report. I did read the material, but as you know, I wasn't at the meeting, unfortunately.
Right.
And luckily, it snowed today, and we were snowed in, so I get to stay home and at least be on this and not on the road to Billings.
Oh, goodness.
I guess I'm happy that it's winter. Not.
Until you start calving?
We've started calving.
Oh.
Lord.
So yeah. A few more updates. We received our official Library Services Technology Act FY19 fiscal award. The amount of that award is about $1,088,000, which is about $10,000 more than we received in FY18. And the Network Advisory Council will begin discussions about the library development budget with that official award amount in mind at their meeting in March. The Museum and Library Services Act, which is the federal act that authorizes the Institute of Museum and Library Services, did pass at the end of last Congress. It had sort of been hanging out there unauthorized for a couple of years, and so the library community was very excited to have that reauthorization passed. It doesn't mean that IMLS couldn't be funded, but having it an authorized program of Congress helps to ensure that there's some kind of continuing funding. The way the act was reauthorized, it increased the base amount of funding through the Grants to States program to all state libraries. So right now, prior to this reauthorization, the base amount that state libraries receive is $680,000, and then any amount appropriated by Congress over and above that base is distributed based on a per capita formula. The reauthorization ups that base to $1 million per state library. The current budget does not fully fund that new base, and so the next effort is to ensure that the Grants to States program is funded at least at a level that could ensure that all libraries receive the base funding. That's about a $17 million increase to the Grants to States program. So I think and hope that we'll begin to see action, certainly from the chief officers of state library agencies and maybe from the American Library Association, to start talking about increasing the Grants to States award to fully fund the authorized base amount. For the state library, that would be a fairly significant increase, as the smaller population states that benefit most from having the base increased. And early projections show about a 30% increase in LSTA funds to the state library if that base amount is funded. And then on a related note, the chief officers of state library agencies are continuing their effort to champion what we're calling our dollar per capita initiative, or essentially working to, in the future, double the amount of funding that's made available through the Grants to States program. Again, that's about currently about $160 million. We would like to see that program be funded at about $325 million. We see that as a long-term effort, but right now we have good support from COSLA, from all of the regional associations of state librarians. 22 states have passed resolutions endorsing this effort. The Association of Rural and Small Libraries endorsed it, and the United for Libraries organization, or I'm not sure if it's a chapter of ALA or what their designation is, but they're the group within the American Library Association that works to support friends and foundations. So lots of momentum there, but of course a long-term effort when we're talking about that kind of significant funding increase. Any questions about our federal funding? And so just a couple of brief staffing updates. We just hired an administrative assistant who will be supporting Erin Fashaway, the GIS coordinator, and Tracy Cook, providing some admin support for them. His name is John Kilgour. He just started on Monday, so he's going through orientation and sort of learning the ropes. We will bring him to your April meeting when you're all meeting in person, so you have a chance to meet him. But we're glad to have that position filled. Again, that was one of our priorities as we identified funds to start refilling some positions. We have a lot of our professional staff spending their time on administrative tasks that need to be done and are taking away their time from the work that they need to be doing. So we're really, really glad to have that position filled. And then we are losing Karen Dimmitt. She's our circulation clerk for the Talking Book Library. She's retiring on March 1st. And so we're going through a recruitment process to fill that position. I think I'll stop my report there and just ask if there are any additional questions or any questions from your written reports. Evan wants to jump in. Go ahead, Evan.
I was just going to point out in the digital library report, there are two projects, contracts that are wrapping up at the end of the month. The Talking Book digitization and the GIS data assessment. I think those are things that we'd be happy to put on the next agenda for an update on, just an overview, close out of those two projects.
Yep.
Thank you. We'll go to Melissa for the fiscal year 2019 second quarter financial report.
Great, thank you so much. I'll just start out by going over the document that you received ahead of time. I did make several changes, some additions, and some things that I removed that I didn't think were helpful. So if you have questions about that, please feel free to stop me. And I am hoping to continue to make changes in the future. So this is sort of a working document that I want to make sure fits the needs and the information that you all require. So on the first page of the handout, I added a chart that shows the trust project's expenditures. I thought it was important that you all can see the progress that's being made on these projects. So there's a total of $450,000 that's been budgeted, and so far we've spent approximately $170,000 of that, and we have about $280,000 left to spend. On the next page, you can see that I added a couple of charts that just show the balances that we have at the Board of Investments. The first chart shows our trust balance. You can see that that is a large amount and it stays pretty flat, but in the past couple of months, you've seen a decrease, and that's a reflection of the chart that was on the previous page. The second chart, the second line graph shows you the balance of the land information account. There's also quite a bit of funding in that at the Board of Investments. It fluctuates a little bit more, and the money that comes into that account reflects the interest payments that we receive through the Board of Investments. On the next page, you can see the income statement for the agency as a whole. I'll point out the first line you can see is that there has 46% of personal services has been expended for the first half of the fiscal year. And so seeing that we're 50% through the year as of that point in time, that's pretty close. And I'm really happy with that. That's an expense that is easily projected and knowable. So to be at 46%, we're right in line with where we need to be. Operations is the next category. You can see that we are 53% spent in our appropriations, and that's just fine. There's a lot of timing expenses that we see in the first part of the year that we won't see in the second part of the year, so we're right in line. The total line at the bottom shows that the average between those two is 44%. So we have spent 2.7 million of our appropriations, and that's 44%, and we're 50% through the year. So I'm very comfortable with that, and I think that we're right in line, and we will be working some projections for the next couple of months to make sure that we are spending all of our appropriations accurately. Any questions on this? I'm behind the pages behind here just go into detail and break out the same information for each of the 3 programs. So I'm happy to answer any questions on those.
Well, one of the numbers that I would find helpful would be just maybe 3 or 4 lines showing the total number of FTEs, both unmodified, modified, in the percentage that we have filled in each of those, because that would add meaning to those personnel numbers. So if we're at 80% FTE, which we're not, if we had filled 80% of our positions and we had spent 46% of our stuff, that would be a meaningful delta.
Yes.
So that would be helpful.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm happy to add that.
But
that will also be more meaningful once we get all of our appropriation back.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, how are we for? How many FTEs do we have funded in all categories at this point, and how many of those are unfilled?
There are I think it's 6.5 are unfilled right now.
Yep.
Because we don't have the appropriation to fill those. That was part of the
Understood. Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
I should have said funded.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually better than I thought. Well, that's good then.
So out of the well, prior to today's committee action, out of the 30.46 FTE, we had 6.46 vacant, I think was the number.
So it's the funded number, not just the
right
official FTE number.
Yes.
Have
Yep.
to take both into account.
Yeah,
Yep.
good. Okay, good. So there's nothing. There are no positions that are funded that are unfilled at this point. There are no vacancies at this point, except for those that were caused 2 years ago.
Let me try to explain this in just a little bit different way. So in FY18, well, we had the cuts that left positions vacant, and we didn't fill any of those positions really in FY18 because we had some of the buyouts from the RIFs and retirements that occurred. So in FY19, we had a little bit of extra personal services funding that wasn't available to us in FY18. We have used some of those funds to hire our part-time IT person, Stanley Munson, who you met, and we've used some of those funds now to hire John Kilgour, who just started this week. And we were able to hire an additional reader's advisor. We went through the process of prioritizing those positions. So as we've identified personal services funds to fill these prioritized positions, we've been filling them. At this point, I think we've expended all of the personal services that we had available to us this fiscal year. As Melissa said, we're going to be doing projections to make sure we're spending out that appropriation. But it's unlikely that there's much, if any, additional personal services funds that we could use to fill the remaining FTE that are on the books. However, again, with the action the commission or the subcommittee took today, if that holds to the session as of July 1, we'll have funding to start filling those additional FTE.
Great.
Does that answer your question, Bruce?
Yeah, it's more complicated than
It is. Exactly.
I just want to add too that we have additional positions left unfilled because of the vacancy savings.
Yeah.
So that's where they've reduced our appropriation, but the FTE is still there. So we had to hold a little bit more FTE unfilled because of that. It was particularly high last session. I think it was 6%, which is higher than it typically is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the coal tax fund. As most of you probably know, that is a new fund for the state library that was created during the last legislative session. So we were appropriated $497,000 for FY19 out of this fund. We've been a little bit cautious to spend that because the cash flow in that account is unknown. And so we don't want to overspend and then have to cover it through other sources within the agency. But we certainly don't want to leave any of it on the table because we are very grateful for all of it. So, so far this year, out of the almost $500,000, we've spent $282,000 of the coal monies, and so that leaves our appropriation balance at $215,000. The cash balance in that account has been much lower than that for the last several months, but recently we've seen some revenue come in, and so now the balance in that account is at $202,000. So we are about $10,000 short of cash, and so we have many months left in the year. So we're very hopeful that we'll be able to spend all of that appropriation, and then in the future we'll be able to build that cash balance up so we don't have timing issues like we've had so far this year.
I can tell you that the staff are very excited about the prospect of having a cash balance in that account to start the next fiscal year. It's created a lot of headaches for us. We know it's created some headaches recently for libraries when we had to delay payments to federations. We had to delay payments to some of our primary vendors. And so the idea that we should hopefully knock on whatever this Formica top is, that we can start the next fiscal year with some cash.
Just two more things. I just wanted to give a quick update on the revenue estimates that are coming from OBPP and also LFD. When these estimates change, they can have a big impact on the session and on our budget. So we watch closely what they're projecting. So back in November, OBPP and the LFD had revenue estimates that were within about $50 million. So that's incredibly close and hasn't been the case in years past. So we're really excited to hear that. They adopted a revenue estimate in HJ2. And so that's what we are working from now. More information continues to come in, and so these estimates are updated routinely throughout the session. So in the next week or so, we'll be getting another report from LFD with additional information, and we're expecting that they'll report that there are downward pressures on the revenue estimate, but hopefully they will be within the margin of error, so they won't have to make any adjustments to HJ2. And then we will expect, typically in the past, in April, they make a change to how they make an update to House Bill 2. So we'll keep a close eye on that. We expect some downward pressures, but hopefully not any significant change in that.
So we do need to take action on the financial report. Would anyone be willing to put forth?
I would move acceptance. Jamie.
This is Ann. I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Let us, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? The motion passes. And Jenny, I would say, if you don't mind, can we move forward to our other action items for the sake of keeping our quorum?
Yes, let's. And then I do want to come back to a little bit further discussion coming out of the financial report, but we could do that after these action items.
Okay, thank you. As those of you may have read this morning, Kenning has another meeting at 3 o'clock. So to keep on time so he can make it to his meeting, we're going to go forward with the coal severance tax funds budget adjustment.
I'll be back, though. I just have to step out for about a half hour.
Good.
Thank you.
To save time, I would like to move that the Commission authorizes staff to reallocate up to $30,000 from the library development budget to the digital library budget.
I'll second.
Oh. Thank you. Any discussion?
Well, maybe it's here where I can insert a discussion point that we wanted to bring to the Commission. We sort of wrestled with whether or not we needed to bring this as an action item to the Commission or not. You, of course, when you adopted your startup budget, authorized us to expend the coal severance tax appropriation. And a change in $30,000 is relatively modest. But at the same time, when you pass that startup budget, you authorize that expenditure, or the budget that you saw had that $30,000 in the library development budget, not the digital library budget. And we thought that that was a significant enough change to warrant bringing it back to the Commission for action. We would like some more guidance on these kinds of decisions in the future. And as Melissa is coming into her own in the position that she has and is wanting to further refine the reporting and ensure that you as commissioners are receiving the information that you want, and as we see on our horizon the need for additional fiscal oversight with the coal severance tax account, with our MLI account, and potentially with this new special revenue account, we would like the Commission to consider creating a finance committee that would work directly with Melissa so that you can have these conversations as a committee of the commission, and then bring these items for commission action. But to have those discussions directly with her in a meaningful way that we feel are better informed by the time then we bring those to the commission. It would be a small group of the commission, less than 4, so it's not a quorum of the commission that we would notice as a public meeting. But then, of course, any discussions and recommendations coming from the committee would come to the commission for discussion in an open public meeting.
I think that's a great model. That's a brilliant. That's how OCLC operated. It improved the conversation and was very efficient. It's a great idea.
So, if there's any other discussion, I don't want to cut off discussion.
I'm nodding my head.
But I agree with him.
Okay. So our bylaws currently don't allow for a finance committee, and they really don't speak to the formation of committees like this. But in April, we need to bring an annual update of the bylaws to the commission. And so what I would like to propose is that in that update, we define the process for creating the finance committee that would then work with Melissa. One of the things that we're talking about is that we also have some input from someone outside the commission, like our OBPP budget analyst, for example. Does that seem like a reasonable approach?
Would you consider just rewording the alteration of the bylaws to be more generic, to say that from time to time the commission may choose to form subcommittees which would act officially, whatever, blah blah blah, and be able to bring recommendations to the commission from committee, so that you could have a personnel, you could have a legal, you could have a finance, you could have library development or marketing, or you could have a variety of different committees. But if you left yourself, if the process was there to form them when they were needed, then you wouldn't have to go back and juggle the bylaws every time you needed to either make or dissolve a committee.
I'm very comfortable with that.
And maybe have some sort of an annual review built in, so that if you started a finance committee, for example, in what are we, fiscal 2020 now? 2019, then it would be reviewed periodically and either maintained or dissolved.
Mm-hmm. Other commissioners, how do you feel about that approach?
This is Anne. I think that sounds very good.
Sure.
Good.
Yeah, I like having the not having to go through and redo the bylaws every time we need a subcommittee.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Kenning. I'm in favor as well.
Good.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, well, is there any other discussion? All of those in favor of passing the coal severance tax, where we, sorry, I'm going from memo to memo. We reallocate $30,000 from the library development budget to the digital library budget. All of those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. This is passed. And we will move on to the revised Federation's plan of service budgets.
So this relates to that increased authority that we have in our coal severance tax monies. One of the priorities that we've identified for spending those coal severance tax monies is increasing the amount of Federation funds that the federations receive and that are budgeted for in their plans of service. And we weren't confident enough in the cash flow in that coal severance tax account to make this recommendation a year ago when the federations were beginning to create their plans of service for this current fiscal year. But now we know that we have sufficient cash flow as well as sufficient authority to allow the federations to expend an additional amount of coal severance tax money over and above what you originally approved when you approved their FY19 plans of service. And so the proposal would authorize the state library to distribute to libraries according to their plans of service an additional $40,000 to be expended by the end of this fiscal year. And then importantly, it would direct the federations to build their plans of service based on an increased and then plan for ongoing appropriation amount. And again, we have that authority, and the cash flow into that account looks positive, so we feel comfortable making that recommendation.
Thank you, Jenny. So would a commissioner be willing to move forward with this action item?
I move that we revise the Federation's plan of service budget. Sorry.
Thank you, Kenning. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Bruce. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes. We'll now move down to the Digital Library Budget Authority Adjustment Memo.
So as it is explained in the memo, to date we've accrued approximately $60,000 in legal fees to defend the agency against the human rights complaint that we discussed in executive session. That amount will increase with the most recent legal bill to about $77,000. We have done research about the best way to pay for these fees, and we paid for this position out of the land information account. We paid for the reduction in force and retirement buyouts out of that account, and there's no legal restrictions from the statute that creates this account that would prevent us from paying these legal fees from the MLIA account. What is a little bit different about the process and why we are requesting commission action is that this the authority to pay our legal fees and any ongoing legal fees from the MLIA account is that this amount is over and above what you have authorized the agency to expend through the land plan process. Typically, the only funds that we've expended have been authorized through land plan action, and that it has included personal services, operations, and grants. The amount necessary to pay for the legal fees that we're accruing now exceed the authority that the commission has approved through that land plan. And so this action would authorize the state library to spend MLIA monies for this purpose over and above what is authorized currently in the land plan. There is sufficient funds in the account, but at this point we're looking to the commission to authorize the use of that account for this purpose. The other thing that I would point out is that as our typical process is to bring the land plan to the Land Information Advisory Council for their input and endorsement before bringing that budget to the commission. But because of the personnel nature of this matter, we did seek guidance from Jeff Dowd about whether or not the commission has the legal authority to authorize this action without council approval first. And he did advise us that the MLEAC is advisory. You are the governing body that has authority over this account, and so you do have the legal authority to take this action.
Feels more like
Take that action.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Jamie?
I move that we take this action.
second.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Does the action need to include the dollar amount?
I don't think so, and I think we'd prefer that it not, because we will continue to accrue some legal fees, as Jeff described, over the course of this process.
Okay, so this would, so by not attaching an amount, this would let the state library use as much as you need throughout this process without revisiting it each time, right?
I think so. We'll make sure that we're reporting on these expenditures to the commission, so you know the impact of the account.
Thank you.
And is this adjustment specifically for this one case, correct?
It is.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the Digital Library Budget Authority adjustment, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Jamie, aye.
Any those opposed, same signal. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. And now we go down to our last action item, the Montana State Library Trust request.
As you can see in your memo, we're bringing forward a trust request for the authority to hire a consultant that would help the state library to completely redesign a new state library website. As is explained in the memo, the last significant rewrite of our website occurred in 2013. We've made some minor updates since that time as we've changed different web platforms. We contracted with Edge Marketing a couple of years ago to just get some input on the navigation and images used on the website, but that was not any kind of major rewrite to the website. We don't have anyone on staff who has the expertise that could help advise on how we should restructure the website, especially given some of the organizational changes that have occurred recently within the state library that really aren't reflected in the overall website. And we really want to get some expert advice on the overall usability of the website, because we serve such diverse audiences. We feel like we need this expertise to help ensure that our web presence is meeting their needs. And so again, this is a request to use trust monies to spend up to $25,000 to hire a consultant to help with this redesign.
Thank you. Is there a motion on the request?
I move that the commission authorizes staff to spend up to $25,000 to conduct a limited solicitation, et cetera, as per the document in front of us.
Second.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Jamie. Any further discussion?
Jenny, this is Kenning. I would encourage you, in addition to doing this, which I think is a good step and is needed, I think you might also want to have a conversation about what I call semantic web identity.
Okay.
So you can see what happens if you search Google for Montana State Library or even State of Montana Library. You get a knowledge card over to the right that's us. Mm-hmm. And that's because we've done the work to make that happen. But there's no similar recognition for your library, and it really it indicates what Google really knows and understands about you. So we can have some more conversation about how to make that happen.
Sounds good. It sounds like something, Kenning, that we would want a requirement or deliverable that we would want included in our limited solicitation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe you can help us when we're crafting that limited solicitation to make sure we get that right.
Super.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. It's sort of a different kind of beast than what most marketing firms are, or most website development firms are capable of. But you can certainly make the effort to make sure that they know that this is necessary.
Good.
I like that idea. Thank you, Kenny.
Sure.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we will vote to approve the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes.
Boy, we're an agreeable.
And that is all of our action items. Would everyone mind taking maybe a 5-minute bio break?
That sounds great.
Great.
All right, thank you. All right, and everybody in the room is back in their seats?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you for taking the break. We'll get back to where we left off before we jumped ahead in the agenda. And is Kara available?
Kara is available. Hi, everyone.
All right.
So you have Jenny's memo regarding this draft policy. Our program officer from IMLS visited us in August, and as a follow-up to that visit, we were advised to draft a policy for how we could provide services to people with limited English proficiency through our LSTA-funded programs. And so I reviewed LEP policies at other state library agencies as well as at some Montana state agencies and institutions. And from that research, I created this draft, which is an attempt to address what we perceive as the current level of need for LEP services through our LSTA programs. And it provides some practical evaluation steps as well as some resources for translation assistance. And specifically, the evaluation matrix was adapted from the Montana Department of Transportation's LEP plan, which was drafted by their Office of Civil Rights. And the offices that are listed as being available for translation assistance do maintain lists of proficient speakers in dozens of languages. Unfortunately, I do see a couple of typos in this policy, which is regrettable. But other than those two small changes, I would welcome feedback and comments from the Commission regarding this draft policy.
So is this a standard policy that we review it now and then act on it in April?
Yes.
I do like how you included, the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs in case there was a translation into a native language. I appreciate that.
This looks to me like something that we may want to fold into a redesign of the webpage.
If any of you have any additional feedback for us prior to the April meeting, we're certainly open to accepting that feedback. And again, you'll see the policy for action in April.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kara.
Okay, and is Jessica Edwards available?
Yes,
For the draft collection development. Okay, thank you.
So we took a stab at updating the collection development policy, especially with the Talking Book Library now under the digital library. We kind of wanted to include everything. And the Talking Book Library policy hadn't been updated since 2011. And the main library policy, I think, was last updated 2012. So there are a few major updates. And we tried to merge everything together and have it reflect our structure as we are right now. And this is also in draft form, so I think it's going to be looked at in April as well. And yeah, it's a little bit condensed too. We found it was very wordy before. Both policies were very wordy. So we took a lot of effort to make it as condensed as possible.
Are there any comments or questions for Jessica?
I thought it was nicely done.
Jessica, this is Kenning. About collecting the county websites in a web archive, do you know how big a potential job that is? Do you know how deep the websites go and how big they are?
This is Evan. I'll answer that. I'll try to answer that. We do not. We are currently looking into that. We do have a listing of websites from Mako. Jim Kammerer is taking that to Internet Archive to have a test run to determine those costs.
Okay, thank you.
I suspect to fully archive those websites might be more than we could fully afford. But we do plan to allocate some coal severance tax monies to doing at least an initial crawl and collecting as much as we can. And based on the information we receive back from the Internet Archive and available funds, we would be able to determine what kind of crawl schedule we could afford and would need to keep.
Mm-hmm.
Were there, Evan needs to remind me, 4 counties that don't have websites?
That sounds correct.
So.
Yeah, for some reason I thought it was 1, and then when we looked
I
at
looked,
it,
there were
was
a
4.
few more. So.
But
But we think it's important to have the fact that we do desire to collect local government information as part of our collection reflected in the collection development policy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
5.
5.
I'd add that there's another piece of to figure out there. It's not our intention to. Our goal is to help encourage county and local government websites to be collected, but not to take that on as our full responsibility. So part of figuring out the costs associated and the effort required to do this, once we have some of that information, we'll try to hone in on, are we doing a yearly snapshot, a yearly crawl, and then encouraging local governments to take it from there if they need more frequent updates to happen or something like that. But we are still in the early stages of figuring this piece out.
When I was working in the public library, managing local governmental information was a real challenge, and we were not equipped to to do a crawl, because there wasn't such a thing as a crawl in those days. But more to the point, there was no thought about except the Dewey Decimal System for making our system discoverable along with Cascade counties, for instance. And that was an opportunity lost both to local government and also to the citizens of both counties and the state. It seems to me that this is a potentially important thing, and perhaps this should be something that we look at doing. It strikes me, though, that it should be done in extraordinarily close consultation with federations at the very least, in perhaps also with the public library community. But I would think if I was still an employed public librarian in the state offered to to not only show some leadership but to help us make this happen, I would jump on it. It'd be a really important service because this information right now is really, in terms of scarcity, the most valuable, and it's mostly unfindable. I think that this is a real opportunity.
Right. It's truly ephemeral government information, and if we can do anything to help ensure that some of it is preserved, and then in our minds empower public libraries to see themselves as government information centers that provide local government information alongside state government and federal government information, then I think we should be doing that. We know that the work goes beyond just collecting and making the information available. We need to help ensure that librarians are well trained to make use of the information and to provide access to that information. And so that's where the work of the digital library and the work of library development come together.
It seems to me there's some logical overlaps with this and with the Historical Society and with the Montana Memory Project and the digital library things that we're doing. There's some opportunities for sort of coordinating. I think a tremendous idea.
I'd also add, speaking to the ephemeral nature, we will be looking into the opportunity, like we did with the state government websites, of what costs would be associated with acquiring existing crawl content. It'll fit into your equation.
I have a question about one word under sort of item 3, purpose, implementation, evaluation, and revision of policy. You say the collection development policy describes how MSL builds, evaluates, and manages its mandated collections. Do we have non-mandated collections? Is there a difference? Is that an important word? I don't mean to be picking, but I'm just wondering if there's some sort of, if there's something I'm missing. Well, I'm sure there's something I'm missing. All right. Now let me see. I'm on page 2, near the bottom of the page of section 3, purpose, implementation, evaluation, revision. And it's the first paragraph.
Do you look at the current or the proposed?
I don't know.
I think you're looking at the current.
I think it might be 2. I don't see that in the proposed.
Okay, then I am missing something. So where's the proposed?
The proposed is the second document.
So I knew I was missing something. I apologize. No, I'm. Okay, so I'm taking the link off the memo.
Yep, that's the current. I just wanted to make sure the commission had access to the current ones rather
I thought
than
they
the
were
proposed.
the same. Sorry.
You'll be happy to know that language does not exist in
I am actually. Thank you. I'm kind of happy. And I apologize for being as happy as I am. I couldn't figure it out. Oh, here we go. Okay.
So again, we're happy to take your continued feedback up to the April meeting, and at the April meeting we'll ask for adoption of this new policy.
Thank you. Well, Bruce, are you ready? You are up for the draft fair library access resolution.
All right. Yes, thank you. I'd like to first thank Evan, Tracy, Jenny, and Ann for your help in kind of drafting this. I'd like to say that this is it's meant as a draft, and if folks have thoughts, I would love to incorporate those thoughts for either polishing or for improving the quality of this. The whole idea is just to say to the library community generally, and also for the commission to basically say to the staff and to the various partners and advisory councils that the state library enjoys, that we're all about equity and fairness. And we want all Montanans to basically have access to library resources sufficient to their needs, which we don't think are the same, but that there's a notion of fairness and equity kind of baked into that. And it also basically, so it says we're all about equity, inclusivity, that we think cooperation is a valuable strategy for making this happen. This resolution establishes a principle, and I presume would become a talking point with many of our partners and advisory groups. And I would assume that what would follow after this would be decisions based on this in regards to resource allocation, acquisitions, various strategies and stuff would follow this. I've included footnotes mostly to make Ann happy, but also to keep track of where these things came from. I would assume that the footnotes would fall out at some point, and it would become simpler, as would the square bracketed headings. But this sort of just documents my thinking as I drafted this, and it made it easier to discuss this with staff and with others that assisted with the building of this resolution. Do you have questions?
I think this is a really good building block for what we were discussing of having having access for everybody. And thank you, Bruce, for moving forward without my feedback, because I had not been able to get to it. So I appreciate it.
Bruce, there's still time, Aaron. There's still time.
There is. Thank you.
I want to speak just a little bit. Oh, I don't want to interrupt anybody, though.
This is Kenning. I wanted to say I really like this too, and I thank you for drafting it. My only concern potentially is the last four words, sufficient unto their needs. How do you define that?
I don't, because I don't think you can. But I think that every Montanan has a section of needs that he or she is probably unique to them, even though of course many of our needs are shared. But I guess what I'm saying is needs are relative, not absolute. Like you may absolutely need a wiring diagram to a 49 Willys Jeep, whereas for me that would just be noise.
Yeah, I get that completely, and I agree completely. What I'm having trouble with is reconciling that to a strategy. How do you develop a strategy for that?
I think that's a great point. When we've been kind of talking amongst ourselves over coffee, one of the things we've been talking about when someone asks us, why are libraries important? We've been talking about that elevator speech, and I'm kind of coming around to maybe the way to answer that is to turn the question around to the person who's asking the question and say, what's important to you? And then they would say, well, I got this Willys Jeep that's not running, and then you say, well, your library, quack quack quack. And of course, many of the things I think are important about libraries are more profound. Many of the ways that libraries help people are more profound than rewiring a Jeep. So I don't have a better idea. I would really welcome if you have a way of nailing that down without getting into sort of a prescriptive, narrow kind of way. I would love to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and simply leaving it at will have access to library services doesn't quite approach what you want.
I think it's a responsibility of every library to engage with their users and determine what their needs are and to determine how they can best provide content and services to meet those needs. So in my view, it's a local kind of thing. I mean, down to a face-to-face interaction between a librarian and a user, or an electronic face-to-face equivalent. I think it's a great question. That's my best answer.
This is Jenny, and I want to. I was going to speak to sort of the practical implications of how I see this resolution moving forward, and I think Kenny, your question, it's sort of at the heart of what this resolution implies for the state library and our services. We've had a lot of discussion internally about the word sufficient, and I think we definitely welcome feedback about that. One of the concerns that I would have if we just left it at access to library services is that I don't feel a sense of leadership behind that. One of the reasons and one of the ways I see the state library and our staff applying this resolution in practical ways is as a sort of a marker that we can look to help libraries identify why they should be providing library services that are sufficient to their community's needs. And I think generally if people read this resolution, there may be pretty broad agreement about the nature of it, but when it comes down to actually adopting library policies and developing resources and creating new programs and services, how a library behaves may in fact be very, very different. And I think we need to give our staff the backup to approach those libraries and those communities and to help them identify where their services may in fact not be sufficient because they're not ensuring this kind of fairness and equity in the services that are being offered to all Montanans. I'm not saying that very succinctly, but there's really sort of two ways that this resolution will manifest itself, and one is in that very human element of our consulting staff and our coordinating staff to be able to go out and say, this is what the state library believes, this is why we think this kind of work is important, and this is how we want to help you also achieve this kind of vision for your community. And then from a very practical sense, we have this idea of an information infrastructure that includes data, information, technology, and staffing resources. And with this resolution, we can say the information infrastructure is intended to help us realize the values and professed in this resolution. And we can begin to study and evaluate what it's going to take to implement this infrastructure and talk about it in really concrete ways so that we can talk about the necessary funding resources and technology that are necessary for us to really truly implement the useful information infrastructure.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I appreciate that. I have to step out, but I will be back in a little while.
I would like to add, if I may, that sufficient was a word that I pulled from the literature that talks about distributive justice, because I think some of those concepts are useful for thinking about this sort of thing. Part of what I intended to imply by that is it's not enough just to have a library. The library really needs to take and be responsive to community and individual needs. Otherwise, it doesn't really meet its needs, because the library's success isn't measured by the number of books it has and the number of hours it's open. It's measured by the degree to which it enables a community and community members to succeed in life, to thrive. And so it tries to get towards that sort of. It's back to Tracy. It's back to Tracy's so that kind of argument that when you reduce the arguments, it don't mean a thing if it's not helping people become more of whom they can be, and solve their problems. It's not enough just to have a library on the hill that is got gold-plated restroom fixtures. It needs to work for the people it's serving. And one of my big concerns with any sort of a federated library effort or program is that we not just do one thing. We not try to design things where one size fits all. That we try to design something so that when it gets to the local libraries and it gets it enables them to meet individual needs. It enables local libraries to become even more local and more relevant, and not to become McDonaldized and kind of general. So that's where the kind of the thinking behind sufficient comes from, is from long concern about not wanting to basically balderize library service in Montana by these otherwise splendid things like the shared catalog or by ebook collections and stuff like that, but to supercharge local libraries' efforts towards actually helping patrons thrive.
I know Kenny had to step out, so and this is his. This is where it came from. I'll just make a very quick comment that what I've enjoyed about this is that I think it's well written in that we all see things in this not necessarily the same, but there are things that we all latch onto, and also things that we interpret differently. For me, what I like about sufficient unto their needs is it takes it from a simple statement to a challenge for us.
It's a huge challenge.
Us as the commission, and not a challenge. I think that it isn't. I don't even say easily measurable, but isn't measurable. It forces us to constantly revisit that. There isn't. I don't think that's known, and I don't think it can ever be known. But it forces us not to simply say, "There's a library there. You can get your books.
Right.
You've got library services."
Right.
It takes that off the table and says, "Well, how do you evaluate this?"
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
So,
yes.
Exactly. And again, I just see this as that kind of truly that statement piece from the State Library and the State Library Commission that this is what we believe, 21st century library services should aspire to. And it's going to be hard. We are going to be challenged by people who might say that they're offering sufficient services, be satisfied with the level of services that they are offering, and be complacent, or there may be other kinds of issues going on within the library or the broader community where what we perceive as insufficient library services are just a symptom of another issue. And to Evan's point, then that becomes a challenge for us to try to figure out how to help them resolve. But again, if we don't have a way to kind of a touchstone to evaluate those services against, that becomes really, really hard for us. This becomes that touchstone, I think, not only for the informational resources and the technology, but for the human element of the work that we're doing as well.
It's not how good the work is that librarians do. It's how well their patrons are served by their library.
Yep.
And I think, so just to add to, the public record, that, Kenyon can go back or we can talk to him later. But when you read the resolution as a whole, we talk about sufficiency of library services. Then the next line is sufficiency unto each Montanan's needs. And so I think having sufficient unto their needs repeated at the end, when taken as a whole for the resolution, it makes more sense than just taking that last line as being a singular line.
Cool.
So again, this is a draft. I'm going to step on Bruce's toes just a little bit and say this is a draft for discussion here. We have spring federation meetings coming up. We have the Network Advisory Council. We have MLEAC meetings coming up. We have the conversations with the commission at the Library Association conference. So we have a lot of time to talk about this in discussion with our partners to get their feedback before the commission finally takes action on it. And I think you should certainly feel free to take action on the timeline that you're comfortable with. One of the things that I see coming out of this resolution is a follow-up trust request for support to contract with some kind of business analyst or consultant that can help us think about, in a really, really practical way, what we mean by a useful information infrastructure, what's in place, where the gaps exist, what kinds of resources we need, how we can use our existing resources more efficiently to truly implement that infrastructure. But I really want that idea, that notion, to be grounded in this resolution.
And I would think that part of what that business consultant might do is also sort of sketch out the information ecology in Montana that is participated in by our partners, because it's not just us providing stuff
Absolutely.
to people, it's also, to Evan's point back a month ago in discussion, it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And the state library's role is probably, much of it is a coordinating role. And without understanding that ecology, it's difficult to understand what that infrastructure needs to be. Cool.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And thank you, everyone, for working on this and having open discussion. I think that's the only way to really have a real impact, is to feel free to have that open discussion about what we're trying to say with this. We'll move forward in the agenda to the commission goals and objectives. Did anyone want to discuss anything on our work plan, or are there new work plan items we should add to this?
Erin, just a couple of quick updates. I hope in April to bring you some examples of some of the progress that we're making on the reporting tools that we have. We did go ahead and license Tableau for one of our staff, and staff are working on learning how we can better integrate a lot of the reporting and metric data that we have available to us, so that we can use Tableau to visualize and better understand our data and reporting. It's sort of early in the progress of understanding that tool, and we've been sort of throwing lots of different data at it, so we don't have a lot that's concrete at this point, but at least we want to share the progress that we're making. And so I hope we can do that in April. And then I think as this resolution develops and we start talking about this idea of the impact on our infrastructure and services, I think we're going to want commission input on how that's shaped. So I think we should be open to the idea of an addition to the commission work plan there. I'm not sure if it's going to be a work group of the commission or exactly how that'll be shaped, but I hope you're open to that idea.
Yes, I was thinking, our discussion about the resolution and how I think it really fits well into our work plan. Are there any more updates or comments on our work plan?
Can we talk about your calendar just a minute?
Yes, please.
So I think we have commissioners committed to going to all of the Federation meetings with the exception of the South Central Federation meeting, which is scheduled for March 16th, which is a Saturday in Billings at the Billings Public Library. So if anyone is available to attend that meeting with me, that would be great.
March 16th?
Yes.
I'll look at my schedule.
Thanks.
I will endeavor.
Thanks, Jamie.
Where else am I going?
I was just looking at that. Let's see. You are going to Miles City the next week. So that would be.
Well, we'll stay in Billings and shop.
There you go. There you go.
Is that the following Saturday?
Yes.
Okay. Okie dokie.
Okay.
One thing I did want to bring up is that to make sure to put yourself on our calendar if you're going to something and you weren't originally scheduled, just so for things like reimbursement, we have that official designation that you're going to be at that meeting. Just some logistical parts of making sure that we have our calendar full. So even if there's more than one commissioner going, that we have you on the calendar.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, that's helpful when we go back to reimburse you for your time and travel to know what was authorized by the commission. And then I also want to talk about attendance at American Library Association in June. As I said at the December meeting, ALA is not organizing National Library Legislative Day this year. They're not organizing any kind of Hill visits this year. The reason for that change is that the ALA annual conference is going to be held in Washington, D.C. in June. Typically, Legislative Day occurs in early May. And from ALA's perspective, June is just too late in the business cycle, in the budgeting cycle for Congress to have any kind of meaningful impact. And they're afraid that people won't be able to come to DC both in May and then again in June. So they're not organizing that event. However, we are certainly open to organizing Hill visits for any Montana librarians who will be in Washington, D.C. for ALA, even if it's just a meet and greet. I think that's always useful. And I plan to be there. I have a number of meetings that week. We are budgeted to send a commissioner to Washington. So if a commissioner is interested in going, and I did confirm with John Finn that other librarians will be there. So if someone is interested in going with me, we will proceed with organizing our own visits with our congressional delegation.
I will be there with funding coming from one of my grants. I'll be presenting and then working with the American Indian Library Association, but I'm welcome to put any Hill visits into my schedule I always see going to ALA is not necessarily a conference anymore. It's always just work for me.
Yeah. So Erin, you'll be there. And again, we do have funding in the commission budget to send another commissioner.
You have staff members' names with whom you speak?
Yes. I would say. Go ahead.
Could you distribute those?
Yeah, you.
I'll be back. I'll be back the 1st of March.
Okay. Yeah, you bet. You bet, Jamie.
Unless you would prefer that we don't cross the line.
Nope. Nope. Just let me know how I can help prepare you. That's fine.
You know, I do better when I'm on my own.
Sounds good. I'll put out another call in April too, in case anybody else wants to attend. And then finally, we have MLA coming up. We need to coordinate your registrations. That's begins April 10th here in Helena. So again, the commission meeting will be that Wednesday, the 10th, and then the conference starts that day and runs through Saturday. So if you could all please let Marlis know if you plan to attend registered as a commissioner. I know at least a couple of you, I'm sure, will register under your library, but if you plan to register as a commissioner, we need to get those registrations in. And then the conversations with the commission is an approved session again this year. It will be on Thursday morning, and largely the discussion will focus on this resolution.
So the 10th is the commission meeting and the 11th is the conversation with commission?
Yes. Erin, that's all I had.
Was there something Melissa was?
Okay. Well, is there any other matter that we didn't discuss in the agenda that needs to be brought up? Any public comment? Hearing none, I will adjourn the meeting at 3:22 this afternoon.
Thank you, Erin.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.